Episode 29, The Robbers' Cave Engineering the Architecture of Hate. Visual, slowly zooming in on a black and white photograph of children playing in a forest, but the edges of the photo are burning away, revealing a harsh, static-filled surveillance monitor underneath. Audio, low, resonant drone, oscillating slightly, overlaid with the faint, slowed-down sound of children laughing. The laughter morphs into a distant, metallic clatter. Narrator. If you take 22 perfectly normal, well-adjusted human beings, strip away the scaffolding of their civilization, and introduce the concept of us versus them, how long does it take for them to invent war? Pause 3 seconds. Narrator. The answer is not a matter of generations, nor years. The answer, buried within a classified archive of behavioral research, is approximately 3 weeks. Visual, quick, jarring flash of a handwritten document. The words, friction phase, and intergroup conflict, are highlighted in blood-red marker. Cut to a sterile, slow pan of an empty summer camp cabin, shadows unnaturally long. Narrator. Welcome back to the archives. Today, we are opening a file that the psychological establishment has long presented as a quaint, albeit slightly flawed, study on group dynamics. Textbooks will tell you it was an observation of natural tribalism. They lie. What happened in the summer of 1954 was not an observation. It was a manufactured genesis. It was the deliberate, calculated engineering of hatred, orchestrated by a man who sought to prove that monsters are not born, they are built, brick by brick, by the unseen hands of authority. Audio, a sharp, sudden strike of a heavy gavel, echoing out into silence. Narrator. This is the true anatomy of the Robbers' Cave experiment. Pause 2 seconds. Visual, the title card appears, sleek and brutalist, The Robbers' Cave. Beneath it, a subtitle typing out, The Architecture of Hate. Act I, The Architect and the Illusion of Eden. Narrator. To understand the architecture of a psychological weapon, one must first understand its engineer. Muzaffar Sharif was not a detached, ivory tower academic born into American privilege. He was a man who understood the machinery of conflict because he had been crushed beneath its gears. Visual, archival footage of geopolitical turmoil in the 1940s, morphing into a stark, high-contrast portrait of Muzaffar Sharif. The portrait slowly zooms in on his eyes, which are obscured by harsh shadows. Narrator. Born in Turkey at the turn of the 20th century, Sharif witnessed the collapse of empires, the eruption of brutal ethnic violence, and the swift, terrifying mobilization of populations against one another. He did not view tribalism as an abstract concept, he viewed it as a lethal virus. But more importantly, he observed that this virus was rarely a spontaneous mutation. It was almost always introduced, cultivated, and weaponized by leaders. When Sharif fled to the United States, he brought with him a singular, obsessive hypothesis: conflict is not inherent to the human condition. It is a product of environmental design. If you control the environment, you control the allegiances. If you control the allegiances, you can manufacture a war from nothing. Pause 3 seconds. Narrator. By 1954, Sharif was ready to build his crucible. He required an isolated laboratory, free from the contaminating variables of modern society. He found it in Robbers' Cave State Park, Oklahoma, a sprawling, densely forested wilderness. It was the perfect vacuum. A blank canvas upon which to paint a masterpiece of behavioral manipulation. But a crucible is useless without the right raw materials. Visual, a series of clinical, sanitized medical files sliding across the screen. The names are redacted, but the demographics are starkly visible: white, Protestant, middle class, intact families, average IQ. Narrator. The selection process was a masterclass in establishing a baseline of absolute normalcy. Sharif and his team of researchers, who operated less like scientists and more like an intelligence agency, screened hundreds of 11- and 12-year-old boys from the Oklahoma City area. They ruthlessly filtered out any child with a history of behavioral issues, broken homes, trauma, or eccentricities. Why? Because the narrative required a clean slate. If the boys were already violent, the experiment would prove nothing. Sharif needed the absolute pinnacle of mid-century American innocence. He needed the boys to be interchangeable, healthy, well-adjusted cogs. Pause 2 seconds. Narrator. 22 boys were ultimately selected. They did not know each other. They did not know they were part of a psychological operation. They believed they were simply going to a summer camp. They packed their bags, waved goodbye to their parents, and boarded buses headed for the wilderness. Visual, grainy footage of a 1950s bus driving down a dusty road, fading into the dense, oppressive canopy of the Robbers Cave forest. The camera tilts down to show two separate, distinct campsites, completely isolated from one another. Narrator. Sharif divided the 22 boys into two groups of 11. This division was not random, it was precisely calibrated to ensure both groups were physically and intellectually matched. They were housed in separate ends of the massive park. For the first week, neither group knew the other existed. This was the genesis phase. The cultivation of the in-group. Audio, faint, rhythmic beating of a drum, slow and steady like a heartbeat. Narrator. Sharif knew that before you can introduce a threat, you must first construct something worth threatening. Over the course of the first week, the researchers, acting as camp counselors, facilitated activities designed to rapidly forge a collective identity. The boys built rope bridges together. They pitched tents. They cooked meals over open fires. Without any prompting, the psychological architecture of tribalism began to assemble itself. It is a terrifyingly predictable algorithm. First comes the territory. The boys began to view their immediate surroundings not as shared parkland, but as their land. Next comes the iconography. The human mind abhors a vacuum of identity. The two groups spontaneously demanded names for themselves. One group christened themselves the Eagles. The other chose the Rattlers. They designed flags. They stenciled their totems onto their shirts. Visual, close-up shots of the handmade flags, one bearing an eagle, the other a coiled snake. The camera pans across them slowly, highlighting the crude but potent symbolism. Narrator. Notice the speed of the infection. Within less than a week, 22 strangers had fractured into two distinct sovereign nations, complete with borders, flags, and an internalized sense of superiority. The Eagles viewed themselves as the righteous, rule-abiding elite. The Rattlers cultivated an ethos of rugged, aggressive masculinity. But this was merely the foundation. Identity, in a vacuum, is stable. Sharif did not want stability. He wanted a detonation. Pause 3 seconds. Narrator. The researchers, watching from the shadows like parasitic gods, noted that the boys were beginning to feel ownership over the camp. The stage was set. The raw materials had been refined into two distinct, highly cohesive units. It was time to introduce the catalyst. It was time for the Eagles and the Rattlers to discover they were not alone. Act 2, The Investigation Engineering Hate. Audio, a sudden, sharp blast of a whistle, instantly silencing the ambient sounds of nature. The sound of running footsteps on dirt begins to build. Narrator. The collision was orchestrated with the precision of a military ambush. The researchers intentionally arranged for the Eagles and the Rattlers to cross paths near the camp's baseball diamond. The reaction was instantaneous and primal. Before a single game had been played, before any resources were contested, the mere existence of the other was perceived as an existential threat. The boys immediately engaged in name-calling. They drew a literal line in the dirt. But verbal hostility was insufficient for Sharif's ultimate goal. To forge a weapon, you must apply extreme heat. Welcome to the friction phase. Visual, an old scorecard, the columns reading Eagles and Rattlers. The numbers are aggressively tallied in black ink. The camera pans down to a gleaming, silver trophy and an array of expensive pocket knives. Narrator. To accelerate the animosity, Sharif introduced a tournament of competitive games, baseball, tug-of-war, tent pitching. But these were not merely games. Sharif weaponized the concept of the zero-sum economy. There were no participation trophies at Robbers Cave. The winning team would receive a highly coveted trophy, pocket knives, and medals. The losing team would receive absolutely nothing. If the Eagles win, the Rattlers suffer. If the Rattlers win, the Eagles suffer. Sharif was simulating the foundational trigger of all human warfare, resource scarcity. Pause 2 seconds. Narrator. The psychological decay was catastrophic, and it happened almost overnight. The boys who, just days prior, were meticulously selected for their politeness and emotional stability, began to morph into feral partisans. Visual, archival photos flashing in rapid succession, boys scowling at each other, pulling desperately on a tug-of-war rope, a boy with a bloody nose, a torn flag lying in the mud. Narrator. When the Eagles won a baseball game, the Rattlers did not just walk away in disappointment. They plotted retribution. Under the cover of darkness, the Rattlers marched to the Eagles' camp, tore down their flag, and set it on fire. The next morning, the Eagles discovered the charred remains of their symbol. They did not appeal to the camp counselors for justice. They sought vengeance. The Eagles launched a retaliatory raid, storming the Rattlers' cabin, flipping beds, tearing up personal belongings, and stealing property. Audio, the sound of glass breaking, followed by chaotic shouting, slowing down into a muffled, distorted echo. Narrator. We must pause here to examine a crucial, deeply unethical element of this experiment that textbooks conveniently omit. The researchers were not passive observers. They were active provocateurs. When the conflict occasionally cooled down, Sharif and his staff would covertly intervene to reignite the flames. They acted as a hidden hand, deliberately destroying property and tampering with the environment, knowing the boys would instantly blame the opposing group. In one suppressed instance, researchers deliberately broke the Rattlers' belongings and left evidence pointing to the Eagles. They were not studying natural tribalism. They were pouring gasoline on sparks. They were manufacturing consent for violence. Visual, a slow pan over a declassified document page, the text fading out except for a single sentence. The staff must actively structure the situations to promote maximal friction. Narrator. Consider the terrifying implications of this. A group of adults, acting with unchecked authority, use deception and psychological manipulation to force children into a state of war, simply to validate a hypothesis. They were playing God in a laboratory made of pine trees and dirt. By the end of the second week, the situation had spiraled completely out of control. The boys began carrying rocks in their pockets, explicitly intended to be used as weapons. They constructed crude fortifications around their cabins. They refused to eat in the same dining hall, holding their noses when the opposing group walked by, describing them not as rivals, but as subhuman, stinkers, and communists. Pause 3 seconds. Narrator. Let us look at the anatomy of this hatred. It did not require centuries of religious indoctrination. It did not require deep-seated racial prejudice. It required exactly 3 ingredients, perfectly mixed by Muzaffar Sharif. First, group identity, the arbitrary division of people into categories. Second, zero-sum competition, the illusion that survival depends on the destruction of the other. Third, the invisible hand, the manipulation by an unseen authority that benefits from the conflict. Visual, a split screen. On the left, the children of robbers' cave fighting. On the right, modern riot footage, political rallies, and chaotic social media feeds flashing rapidly. Narrator. Look at the world today. Do you see it? The architecture of hate has not changed. It has simply been scaled up. When media conglomerates and political algorithms divide us into rigid ideological camps, they are assigning us our Eagles and Rattlers t-shirts. When they convince us that every political victory for the opposition is a literal threat to our existence, they are setting up the zero-sum tournament. And when the invisible hand of the algorithm feeds us tailored outrage, deliberately suppressing nuance to keep us angry, it is the modern equivalent of Sharif's researchers breaking our belongings in the night. We are all participating in the robber's cave experiment, every single day. And just like the boys, we are entirely blind to the researchers pulling the strings. Audio, a low, ominous synthetic bass drop. Narrator. Sharif had successfully created a war zone. But a scientific study requires a conclusion. He had proven he could engineer hate. Now, to secure his funding and cement his legacy, he had to prove he could turn it off. It was time for the integration phase. Act 3, The False Peace and the Middle Grove Mutiny. Visual, the camera slowly pans across the calm, glassy surface of a lake at dawn. A water tank sits on a hill in the distance, rusted and ominous. Narrator. The official narrative, the one printed in every introductory psychology textbook in the world, tells a story of redemption. Sharif's grand finale was the integration phase. According to the textbooks, Sharif introduced superordinate goals, challenges that required both groups to cooperate to survive. The camp's water supply was mysteriously severed. A truck carrying food became stuck in the mud. The Eagles and the Rattlers, realizing they could not solve these existential threats alone, laid down their arms. They worked together to fix the water pipe. They pulled the truck from the mud using the very same rope they had used to battle each other in tug-of-war. Audio, soaring, triumphant string music begins to swell, sounding almost artificially sweet and cinematic. Narrator. The boys rode home on the same bus, singing songs, their artificial animosity dissolved by the power of mutual cooperation. It is a beautiful, heartwarming conclusion. It suggests that while human nature is easily corrupted, it is equally easily redeemed by shared hardship. Audio. The music suddenly cuts out with the sound of a needle violently scratching across a vinyl record. Narrator. But you are not here for the textbook version. You are here for the classified files. And the truth is, the happy ending of Robber's Cave was just as manufactured as the war. Pause 3 seconds. Narrator. To understand the deception of the integration phase, we must uncover a secret that Muzaffar Sharif went to his grave trying to hide. We must talk about Middle Grove. Visual, a completely black screen. A single, grainy, out-of-focus photograph of different boys in a different camp fades in. The stamp across the photo reads, "Unpublished data do not circulate." Narrator. Robber's Cave was not the first experiment. It was the second. 1 year prior, in the summer of 1953, Sharif attempted the exact same experiment at a camp called Middle Grove in upstate New York. He selected normal boys. He divided them into two groups, the Panthers and the Pythons. He attempted to incite the friction phase. He stole their clothes. He destroyed their toys. He tried to pit them against one another in a zero-sum war. But it failed. Visual, archival sketches of boys sitting in a circle, looking up defiantly at adults. Narrator. Why did it fail? Because children are not always the mindless automatons that psychologists wish them to be. The boys at Middle Grove began to notice the inconsistencies. They realized their belongings were not being stolen by the other group, but by the counselors themselves. They noticed the adults whispering in the shadows, taking notes, manipulating the environment. Instead of turning on each other, the Panthers and the Pythons did something that terrified Sharif. They united. They formed a unified front against the authority figures. They confronted the researchers. They demanded their belongings back. The experiment collapsed into a mutiny. Pause 2 seconds. Narrator. Sharif was humiliated. His hypothesis was deeply threatened. He realized that a unified populace, aware of its true oppressor, cannot be easily divided by trivial tribalism. So, what did he do? Did he publish the results of Middle Grove, proving that human beings possess an innate capacity to see through manipulation and unite against corrupt authority? Visual, a hand drops a thick file labeled Middle Grove 1953 into a dark incinerator. The flames consume the paper. Narrator. No. He buried it. He suppressed the data. He ensured the academic world never knew that his first attempt at engineering hate resulted in a unified rebellion against the engineers. Armed with the failures of Middle Grove, Sharif redesigned his protocol. The following year, at Robber's Cave, the researchers were instructed to be far more stealthy, far more deceptive, and far more aggressive in their manipulations. They learned that to successfully divide a population, the hand of the orchestrator must remain absolutely invisible. The populace must believe that the conflict is natural, inevitable, and entirely the fault of the other. Pause 3 seconds. Narrator. With the shadow of Middle Grove hanging over him, Sharif knew he could not simply end Robbers Cave with the boys hating each other. The psychological establishment would view it as a terrifying, unethical failure. He needed a cure. But the superordinate goals were not organic solutions. The water pipe was not accidentally broken. It was sabotaged by the researchers. The food truck did not accidentally get stuck. It was deliberately driven into a ditch. Sharif created the crises. He created the panic of dehydration. He created the fear of starvation. He held the boys psychologically hostage until they performed the exact cooperative behaviors he needed to photograph, document, and publish to secure his grant money. Visual, fast-paced montage of the researchers smiling for the camera, shaking hands, while the boys look exhausted, dirty, and confused in the background. Narrator. The piece was coerced. The harmony was a hostage situation masquerading as reconciliation. Sharif proved nothing about human nature, except perhaps the boundless capacity of authority figures to exploit the vulnerable for the sake of a narrative. He did not teach us how to solve prejudice. He taught us how to manufacture crises to force compliance. Audio, a slow, creeping hum begins to build. The visuals shift from black and white 1950s footage to high-definition, modern digital noise. Narrator. We look back at Sharif's manipulation with disgust. We condemn the ethics of traumatizing children in the woods. We tell ourselves that the academic review boards of today would never allow such a blatant, sociopathic psychological operation. But what if the operation never stopped? What if it just moved out of the woods, and into the infrastructure of our daily lives? Act 4, the hyperscaled laboratory algorithmic tribalism. Visual, the camera pulls back from the digital noise, revealing that the noise is actually millions of tiny, interconnected profile pictures, shifting in color from blue to red, swarming like insects. The camera keeps pulling back until the swarm forms the shape of a human brain. Narrator. If Muzaffar Sharif were alive today, he would not need a state park in Oklahoma. He would not need tents, or fake rattlesnakes, or physical water tanks to manipulate. He would only need to open his smartphone. We must confront the most terrifying implication of the Robbers Cave experiment. The methodology of Sharif has not been abandoned. It has been automated. It has been digitized. It has been encoded into the very platforms we use to communicate, to learn, and to exist in the modern world. Pause 3 seconds. Narrator. Let us apply the 3 ingredients of Sharif's hatred to the 21st century. First, group identity. In 1954, it was the Eagles and the Rattlers. Today, the internet operates as an unparalleled identity generation machine. Social media platforms do not simply connect us, they categorize us. Through invisible algorithmic sorting, we are segmented into hyperspecific ideological tribes. You are not just a citizen, you are a target demographic. Your preferences, your fears, and your late-night search histories are harvested to place you into a digital cabin. We are encouraged, even financially incentivized, to loudly declare our allegiances. We put flags in our biographies. We adopt specific lexicons. We perform our tribal purity tests every time we post. We have built our own digital camps, and just like the boys in the woods, we have convinced ourselves that our camp is the sole bastion of truth and morality. Visual, fast motion footage of a person scrolling through a phone in the dark. The light from the screen flickers violently against their glassy, unblinking eyes. Narrator. Second, zero-sum competition. The Robbers' Cave researchers used a trophy and pocket knives to create the illusion of scarcity. What is the scarcity in the digital age? Attention. The modern digital economy is entirely predicated on the commodification of human attention. But attention is a finite resource. For an algorithm to capture your attention, it must agitate you. It must convince you that the opposing tribe is not merely wrong, but actively plotting your destruction. Every political debate, every cultural discourse, is framed as a battle for the soul of society. If they win the election, you lose your freedom. If they win the cultural argument, you lose your safety. The platforms have gamified our existential dread. We are trapped in a perpetual tournament where the prize is our own sanity, and we are losing it daily. Audio, the sound of a slot machine spinning, but the cymbals clicking into place are the sounds of cash registers and gunshots. Narrator. Third, and most importantly, the invisible hand. Remember the suppressed reality of Robbers' Cave. The children did not spontaneously break into a riot. The conflict was meticulously cultivated by researchers hiding behind the trees, breaking property, whispering lies, and steering the narrative. The children believed they were acting on their own free will. They were not. They were reacting exactly as the environment was designed to make them react. Who are the researchers today? Visual, a sterile, hypermodern server farm stretching into infinity. The glowing blue lights of the servers blink in an unnatural, synchronized rhythm. Narrator. They are the engagement algorithms. They are the invisible lines of code optimizing for time insight and ad revenue. They do not possess a political ideology. They do not care if you are an eagle or a rattler. They only care about friction. The algorithms have learned what Sharif proved 70 years ago: nothing drives engagement quite like hatred. Hatred is sticky. Hatred keeps you scrolling. Hatred makes you click. When a social media platform notices that a user's engagement is dropping, it does not show them a nuanced, peaceful resolution. It shows them an inflammatory post from the opposing tribe. It deliberately breaks their virtual belongings. It plants the evidence. It incites the riot. It is pouring gasoline on sparks, billions of times a second, across the entire globe. Pause 3 seconds. Narrator. Consider the psychological toll of this hyperscaled laboratory. At Robbers' Cave, the friction phase lasted only a few weeks. The boys were eventually allowed to go home and heal. We do not get to go home. We live in the friction phase. We are subjected to a constant, unending psychological operation that relies on keeping us in a state of high-alert paranoia. We are witnessing the degradation of empathy on a societal level. We see neighbors viewing each other as existential threats. We see the normalization of dehumanizing language, the exact same language the eagles use to describe the rattlers. When we refer to our political opponents as parasites, stinkers, or traitors, we are simply reading from Muzaffar Sharif's script. Visual, a montage of historical propaganda posters fading into modern-day sensationalist news chirons. The words threat, destroy, and war are highlighted in flashing red. Narrator. And what of the politicians? The modern demagogues have studied the architecture of hate perfectly. They recognize that a unified populace is dangerous to the status quo. To maintain power, they must play the role of the camp counselor, constantly reminding the eagles that the rattlers are coming for their way of life. They use the exact same tactics of manufactured crises. They invent cultural wars. They amplify fringe extremists to represent the entirety of the opposition. They rely on the populace remaining utterly blind to the fact that the conflict is a theatrical production designed to harvest votes and donations. We are being farmed for our outrage. Audio, a deep, resonant heartbeat, slow but incredibly heavy, shaking the audio mix. Narrator. The darkest realization is not that we are easily manipulated. The darkest realization is that we actively participate in our own manipulation. We defend the algorithms that radicalize us. We pledge loyalty to the politicians who divide us. We fiercely protect the invisible hand because it tells us exactly what our ego wants to hear, that we are the righteous ones, and everyone else is the enemy. The tragedy of the robbers' cave is not just what the adults did to the children. The tragedy is how quickly the children learned to love the war. Act V, the weaponization of context and in-group policing. Visual, the camera slowly tracks down a seemingly endless hallway lined with mirrors. As it moves, the reflections become increasingly distorted, morphing the viewer's image into monstrous shapes. Narrator. Let us dig even deeper into the mechanics of Sharif's manipulation, because there is a secondary phenomenon that emerged at Robber's Cave, one that is fundamentally critical to understanding our modern dystopia. It is the concept of in-group policing. It was not enough for the eagles to hate the rattlers. To maintain the structural integrity of the tribe, the eagles had to ensure absolute ideological conformity within their own ranks. When the conflict first began, there were a few boys who hesitated. There were boys who did not want to throw rocks. There were boys who remembered that, just a week prior, they were all simply kids at a summer camp. What happened to these moderates? Pause 2 seconds. Narrator. They were crushed. Sharif's observers noted a terrifying internal dynamic. The most extreme voices within a group quickly became the leaders. The boys who were the most aggressive, the most hateful, and the most uncompromising were elevated to positions of status. The boys who preached de-escalation were branded as weak. They were ostracized, bullied by their own friends, and threatened with excommunication until they picked up a rock and joined the mob. Visual, a close-up of a lone, smooth stone held in a trembling, dirt-stained hand. The hand slowly closes around it, the knuckles turning white. Narrator. Tolerance, within a polarized framework, is viewed as treason. Look at our contemporary political and social ecosystems. Do we not see the exact same mechanism of in-group policing? The most radical voices dictate the trajectory of the entire movement. The moderates are purged. The algorithms amplify the extremists because the extremists generate the friction required to monetize attention. If you dare to suggest that the opposing political tribe might have a valid point, or that your own tribe might be making an error, you are not met with reasoned debate. You are subjected to a digital excommunication. You are labeled a traitor, a rhino, a sympathizer, a sellout. The tribe demands absolute, unquestioning loyalty. It demands that you not only agree with their policies, but that you actively hate the opposition with the same vitriolic intensity as the group's most radical members. Audio, a cacophony of overlapping news anchors shouting over each other, the volume rising until it becomes an indistinguishable roar, then abruptly cutting to dead silence. Narrator. To enforce this loyalty, the architects of our modern robbers' cave employ the weaponization of context. At the camp, when an eagle accidentally bumped into a rattler, the rattlers did not view it as an accident. Because the baseline of hostility had already been established, every action was interpreted through a lens of malevolence. A dropped plate was sabotage. A misplaced item was theft. Psychologists call this the fundamental attribution error, but in the context of manufactured conflict, it is a deliberate tool. Today, we are force-fed a diet of decontextualized outrage. A 10-second video clip of a political opponent stumbling over their words is not viewed as a human error, it is presented as undeniable proof of cognitive collapse or sinister intent. An ambiguous statement is instantly interpreted in the most uncharitable, malicious way possible. We no longer share a baseline reality. We have been conditioned to view every action of the other as an act of war. Visual, a series of split screens showing identical actions, a person protesting, a politician speaking, a citizen voting. On one side of the screen, the action is bathed in a heroic golden light. On the other side, the exact same footage is tinted in a sinister, sickly green. Narrator. And this is where the genius of Sharif's methodology truly shines. Once you successfully alter a population's perception of reality, the invisible hand is no longer needed. The system becomes self-sustaining. Sharif did not need to keep stealing pocket knives in the third week of the experiment. The boys were already doing it to each other. The paranoia had taken root. The algorithm of hate was running on autopilot. Similarly, the algorithms of today do not need to invent fake news. They only need to show us the most enraging, cherry-picked slivers of the truth. We will do the rest. We will fill in the blanks with our biases. We will construct the conspiracy theories. We will generate the hatred organically, saving the architects the trouble. We have become our own wardens in a prison of our own making. Pause 3 seconds. Narrator. This raises a terrifying philosophical question. If our hatred can be manufactured this easily, if our deepest ideological convictions can be engineered by adjusting the parameters of our environment, then what does that say about free will? Are your beliefs truly your own? Or are they simply the byproduct of the digital camp you were sorted into? Visual, a slow zoom into the black pupil of a human eye. The pupil expands until it fills the screen, revealing lines of binary code scrolling endlessly downward. Narrator. When you feel that surge of righteous anger coursing through your veins after reading a headline, when you feel the visceral, physical disgust towards someone who votes differently than you, when you feel the undeniable urge to type out a vicious, dehumanizing comment, ask yourself, are you acting freely? Or are you simply a 12-year-old boy in a forest in Oklahoma, picking up a rock because an invisible researcher in a white coat needs you to throw it? Act 6, the Milgram Connection and the Banality of Manufactured Evil. Visual, a slow-motion montage of mid-20th century scientific equipment, a shock generator from the Milgram experiment, a guard uniform from the Stanford prison experiment, and finally, a crude eagle flag from Robber's Cave. Narrator. Robber's Cave does not exist in a vacuum. It is part of a dark trinity of psychological experiments conducted during the mid-20th century, an era when the world was desperately trying to understand how the Holocaust had happened, and how ordinary citizens could be coerced into committing unspeakable atrocities. You likely know the other two. Stanley Milgram proved that ordinary people would administer lethal electric shocks to a stranger simply because a man in a lab coat told them to. Philip Zimbardo proved that college students would become sadistic torturers if they were given a guard uniform and a mirrored pair of sunglasses. Pause 2 seconds. Narrator. But Sharif's work is arguably the most insidious of the three. Why? Because in Milgram's lab, the authority figure was visible. The man in the lab coat stood right behind the subject, demanding compliance. In Zimbardo's basement, the authority was explicitly granted by the parameters of the roleplay. The guards knew they were guards. But at Robber's Cave, the authority was invisible. The manipulation was entirely covert. The boys never knew they were obeying orders. They never knew they were participating in an experiment. They believed their hatred was organic. They believed their violence was justified self-defense. Visual, a shadowy figure standing in the woods, taking notes on a clipboard while looking at two children fighting in the distance. Narrator. This is the holy grail of psychological warfare. It is the concept of plausible deniability of coercion. If you can manipulate a population into destroying itself without ever showing your face, you avoid the risk of a unified rebellion, the very mutiny that destroyed Sharif's first experiment at Middle Grove. During the Cold War, intelligence agencies across the globe studied the Robber's Cave methodology with terrifying enthusiasm. The CIA's MKUltra program, often remembered for its bizarre experiments with LSD, was heavily invested in the broader study of behavioral modification and societal destabilization. How do you topple a foreign government without firing a shot? You do not send an army. You send architects. Audio, a low, rhythmic clicking, like a telegraph machine, speeding up steadily. Narrator. You introduce arbitrary divisions into the target population. You control the flow of resources to create an artificial zero-sum economy. You use covert agents, the invisible hands, to stage false flag operations, breaking the belongings of one tribe and leaving the evidence of another. You wait for the inevitable retaliation. And then, you step back and watch the society consume itself in a fiery, self-sustaining loop of intergroup conflict. The strategy is brutally effective because it preys on our evolutionary biology. Our brains evolved in small, hunter-gatherer tribes on the African savanna. For hundreds of thousands of years, the survival of our ancestors depended entirely on their ability to quickly identify the in-group and fiercely defend against the out-group. We are not wired for global empathy. We are wired for tribal survival. Sharif knew this. The intelligence agencies know this. The social media platforms know this. They are all hacking into our evolutionary source code. Visual, an anatomical graphic of the human brain, focusing on the amygdala. The amygdala glows bright red, pulsing in time with the audio. Narrator. The amygdala, the primitive fear center of the human brain, processes threats milliseconds before the prefrontal cortex can process logic. When a politician or an algorithm tells you that the other is coming to destroy your family, your amygdala triggers a fight-or-flight response. Adrenaline floods your system. Cortisol spikes. Logic is completely bypassed. You cannot reason with someone who is experiencing an amygdala hijack. And a society that is constantly bombarded by manufactured threats is a society trapped in a perpetual state of hijacked biology. Pause 3 seconds. Narrator. The psychological establishment eventually realized the horrifying implications of Sharif's work. In the decades that followed, strict ethical guidelines were established. Institutional review boards were created. Today, you could never legally conduct the Robbers Cave experiment. You cannot isolate children in the woods, subject them to psychological torment, and actively provoke them into violence. It is banned in the laboratory. Visual: the camera snaps back to the chaotic split screen of modern riots, angry political pundits, and endless, scrolling social media feeds. Narrator: but it is not banned on the internet. It is not banned in the political arena. It is not banned in the corporate media. The ethical constraints apply only to the scientists in the ivory tower. The architects of our digital reality operate with total impunity, running the Robbers Cave experiment on billions of human subjects simultaneously, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We are not the researchers. We are not the observers. We are the eagles, and we are the rattlers. And we are currently burning down our own camp. Conclusion: the final warning. Audio: the ambient sounds of the Robbers Cave forest slowly return. Birds chirping, wind rustling through the trees. But it sounds hollow, metallic, like a recording played over a cheap speaker. Narrator: the files of Muzaffar Sharif leave us with a deeply uncomfortable paradox. We want to believe that we are rational, independent thinkers. We want to believe that our hatreds are justified, and our enemies are truly evil. But the archives tell a different story. They tell us that under the right conditions, with the right psychological levers pulled, you and I could be made to hate anyone. We could be made to burn their flags, steal their property, and justify our cruelty as a moral imperative. The next time you feel the irresistible pull of the tribe. The next time the algorithm presents you with the perfect, infuriating caricature of your political enemy. Stop. Take a breath. Look up at the trees. And ask yourself, who benefits from my anger? Who is holding the stopwatch? And who is handing out the pocket knives? Visual: the camera tilts up to the canopy of the forest, which suddenly glitches and resolves into the ceiling of a massive, dark laboratory. The screen cuts to black. Narrator: until next time, keep your eyes open. The experiment is ongoing. Audio: a sharp click, followed by the low hum of static fading into silence. Epilogue: the architect's legacy. Audio: a slow, haunting piano melody begins to play over the ambient static. Narrator: what became of Muzaffar Sharif, the man who proved that the human soul could be rewired for war in under 3 weeks? He did not face a tribunal. He was not stripped of his academic credentials. Instead, he was celebrated. The Robbers Cave experiment became one of the foundational texts of modern social psychology. Sharif was awarded prestigious grants. He wrote best-selling textbooks. He was lauded as a pioneer who helped humanity understand the roots of prejudice. Visual: a sequence of prestigious academic awards, textbook covers bearing Sharif's name, and black and white photos of Sharif shaking hands with distinguished academics in sterile university hallways. Narrator: but those who study the dark arts of psychological manipulation know the truth. Sharif did not simply study prejudice, he authored a user manual on how to create it. And while the academic establishment praised his findings on superordinate goals and the power of cooperation, the intelligence agencies, the political strategists, and eventually, the algorithms, studied the friction phase. They studied the midnight raids. They studied the manipulation of resources. They studied the terrifying ease with which 22 innocent children were turned into feral partisans. Pause 2 seconds. Narrator. Sharif died in 1988, long before the advent of the modern internet. He never lived to see the global, hyperscaled realization of his experiment. He never saw how the Eagles versus Rattlers dynamic would transcend the physical boundaries of an Oklahoma state park and infect the digital infrastructure of human civilization. Yet, in his later years, those close to him noted a profound sense of pessimism. Despite his public assertions that human conflict could be resolved through cooperation, Sharif privately recognized the terrifying potency of the weapon he had documented. He knew that it is infinitely easier to break a society apart than to put it back together. He knew that the architecture of hate is structurally sound, highly resistant to logic, and remarkably cheap to build. Visual, a close-up of a vintage pocket watch ticking away, the hands moving backward. The ticking slowly morphs back into the sound of the heavy wooden gavel striking from the opening of the episode. Narrator. We are the heirs of his architecture. We live in the house that Muzaffar Sharif built. Every time we log on, every time we tune in, every time we allow the invisible hand to dictate who we are supposed to hate today, we are simply participating in the next phase of the experiment. The tragedy is not that the experiment was conducted in 1954. The tragedy is that the experiment was so wildly successful, they never needed to shut it down. Image prompts for production. 1. Prompt, a stark, high-contrast black and white photograph of a 1950s summer camp cabin. The cabin is empty, but the shadows cast by the trees on the wooden walls are unnaturally long, jagged, and resemble grasping hands. The mood is eerie, clinical, and ominous. 2. Prompt, a classified, vintage manila folder sitting on a metallic table under a harsh overhead interrogation light. The folder is stamped with Robbers Cave Top Secret Do Not Circulate, in faded red ink. A pair of wire-rimmed glasses and a black fountain pen lie next to it. 3. Prompt, a split-screen illustration. On the left side, a group of 1950s boys in t-shirts are aggressively pulling a thick hemp rope in a game of tug-of-war, grimacing with anger. On the right side, a group of modern adults in business casual attire are pulling an identical rope, screaming at each other, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of smartphones. 4. Prompt, an extreme close-up of a crude, hand-painted flag on a piece of torn canvas. The flag depicts a stylized, aggressive-looking eagle in blue paint. The edges of the canvas are scorched and smoldering with embers. Cinematic lighting, deep shadows. 5. Prompt, a 1950s researcher in a crisp white lab coat hiding behind a massive, moss-covered oak tree in a dense forest. He is covertly taking notes on a clipboard. In the blurred background, two groups of children are shoving each other in a dirt clearing. 6. Prompt, a rusted, vintage 1950s water tank sitting atop a rocky hill at dawn. The metal is heavily corroded. A large, deliberate gash is visible on the side of the main pipe, with water slowly leaking out. The scene is bathed in a cold, unnatural blue light. 7. Prompt, a pile of shattered children's toys and torn clothing sitting in the middle of a dirt path in the woods. A pair of adult dress shoes is visible walking away from the pile, leaving deep footprints in the mud. 8. Prompt, an old-fashioned, mechanical slot machine, but instead of fruit symbols, the reels display human emotions, anger, fear, and hate. The slot machine is hooked up to a tangle of modern fiber optic cables that glow with a sinister red light. 9. Prompt, a massive, brutalist server farm stretching into infinity. The servers are arranged to look exactly like the trees in a dense, dark forest. The glowing LED lights of the servers resemble hundreds of tiny, watchful eyes in the dark. 10. Prompt, a close-up of a human eye wide open in terror. In the reflection of the pupil, instead of a room, you see thousands of scrolling lines of social media comments and binary code. The scara of the eye is bloodshot. 11. Prompt, a 1950 Sarah scorecard titled Friction Phase. The columns say eagles and rattlers. Instead of numbers, the tallies are marked with drops of dried blood. Next to the scorecard is a gleaming, brand new hunting knife. 12. Prompt, an eerie, surreal image of a dozen identical boys standing in a circle in a dark forest. They all have blank, emotionless expressions and are wearing the exact same clothes. Above them, a giant pair of invisible hands made of static and digital noise is manipulating them like marionettes. 13. Prompt, a thick file folder labeled Middle Grove Mutiny, burning inside a dark, metallic incinerator. The flames are bright orange and yellow, illuminating a pair of cold, unblinking eyes watching the fire from the darkness outside the incinerator. 14. Prompt, a hyperrealistic illustration of an anatomical human brain. The prefrontal cortex is gray and dormant, while the amygdala is glowing with an intense, radioactive red light that seems to be burning the surrounding tissue. 15. Prompt, the final shot. A POV perspective looking up at the sky through a dense forest canopy. The leaves and branches suddenly start glitching like a broken computer monitor, revealing a sterile, acoustic tiled ceiling and bright fluorescent laboratory lights hiding behind the sky.